Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's guest is Jonathan Pageau, who's an icon carver and a symbologist and somewhat of a YouTube hermeneut. That is, a interpreter of the meaning inside of various cultural artifacts and products. I wanted to speak to him about the template of the temple of human meaning, if there is such a thing, like a pattern that undergirds all of our meaning-making patterns. And we start there, but then we veer off into a bunch of different areas regarding humanity and our collective meaning and our spirituality and our religiosity, or just our religious impulse. This is our third or fourth time speaking, and so if you want to know the development of these conversations, I will try to link a miniature playlist down below for you to surf the symbolic waves with myself and Jonathan. For now, I will hope that you are content to just dive into the deep end of meaning with us, or the deep end of the meaning pool with us. Here you go.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. I think the last time we spoke was probably in June or July with Paul Vanderklay. It's a while ago.
Was it last year? Yeah, that would make sense. That makes sense.
The world was like going...
And as if it has stopped going.
What have you been investing most of your time in lately?
I mean, I'm just trying to kind of consolidate. I'm trying to make the whole symbolism thing not about me, I guess, would be a lot of my energy is going into. And so there are a lot of people kind of buzzing around who have their own content, and there's like a Facebook group, and so I'm changing my website into kind of a platform which will be a place for discussion and for people publishing their own stuff. So that's been, so we've already been doing it. Like, we have a blog that people publish on, and we have like a group of editors and a group of kind of proofreaders and stuff. And so I'm trying to take that to the next level so that we can, just, to me, it's I'm hoping there'll be like a team of people that kind of understand what all this is about, so that we can keep changing the world, I guess. That's the idea.
What is this all about, Jonathan?
Well, it's really about, one of the things that's going on is that the world is being re-enchanted, you could say. And so the religious is crashing back into reality, whether we want it or not. It's just happening. And so the idea is, I'm hoping that there can be enough people that are advancing in this direction with understanding, and with an understanding of what's happening, and so that it doesn't get out of control. And so the last year, with the whole Floyd protests and, the weird vibe around COVID and the way people perceive it, and these strange new ways to show you're a good person, all of these strange things are all kind of flooding in, and people are struggling to really understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's what's going on, is that a lot of the modernity and the kind of materialism is breaking down. And so that can have some scary ramifications. And so hopefully we can have some people that are speaking into that in a good way.
Yeah. It seems like, listening to your material, there's a pattern underneath the pattern making. Like, there's this algorithm of pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it can be distilled into like a very simplified pattern. Is it intuitive? Is it like math, like picture math in some way? Mm-hmm. Is it you projecting onto the world in order that you previously know, or that you kind of recognize, I don't know, intuitively, subconsciously?
Yeah. I think it's a place where it's hard to differentiate the two, in the sense that, so one of the things that's going on, I would say, one of the things that people are understanding more and more is the role that consciousness plays in how reality appears to us. And so that consciousness, conscious beings, intelligence is actually a part of how the world lays itself out. And so, the whole problem of emergence and how complexity and unity can coexist is something that just in a lot of fields they're really struggling to deal with. They're really struggling to find solutions to. And consciousness seems to be the solution, though it's very difficult to understand consciousness because it's the vehicle by which we understand reality. So it's like it's hard to have the self-reflexive move, let's say. And so, but once you kind of understand that, once you understand that consciousness actually plays a role in how reality lays itself out, then the difference between, recognizing a pattern in reality and let's say from outside, not imposing, but let's say kind of mapping a pattern onto reality, that those two end up just being the same thing. Especially if you don't see it as a subjective thing. It's like, it's not arbitrary. It's not like everybody has their own little patterns that they try to project onto the world. There's an objective reality to that, which is that the world reveals itself to us as pattern. And if we engage it with the right patterns, then it'll be the most fruitful. And so people do it all the time, right? You can actually try to hold on to little patterns or to try to see little patterns as more important than what they are. And then what's going to happen is it's going to work for a while and then it's going to break down and you're going to run into problems. And so like you can see that in yourself. Let's say your desires are patterns. And so if you can latch onto these little patterns, and if you're not careful, then they actually exist. Like they have their own existence. So it feels like you're on a right track. But then when you start to play it out, then it will devour you, or and something like that.
So speaking of biology, let's say our digestive tract. So one way of adulating that is to become a glutton or an Epicurean, even to really maximize that portion of life and to maximize that pattern. And equal and opposite, but perhaps still the same thing, is to become a hardcore dietarian and to worship that or make that your ladder.
That's a great God right now. There's so many, like that dietary God is just taken over. Everybody just talks about food all the time. It's really hilarious. I mean, it really is. It shows you like what happens when these smaller patterns kind of take over, and they kind of take over the horizon of reality, and then everything gets seen through that lens. That's a great example, like, and so the dietary guy sees himself as an opposite to the fast food glutton, but they're serving the same God ultimately. Just like the capitalists and the communists see themselves as enemies, but they're just all serving the same thing.
What would be the common God in the capitalist communist continuum?
Well, the idea that the purpose of humanity is kind of physical wealth, or let's say physical comfort, and so if you attain that, then you'll be free somehow. And so the communist thinks it has to be done equally and through this kind of this system that kind of gives to everybody what they need, and the capitalist thinks it's through competition, through effort, but both are worshiping the same thing. And so even though they're enemies, they end up being on the same field. So that's why when someone asks me that, like, are you a socialist? Are you a capitalist? I'm like, I'm not going to play your game. I don't see those as being the highest value, so.
Yeah, but you can still articulate value within that conversation.
You're
deign to.
Yeah, exactly. No, I can still see that. Well, I see that both of those systems, when run, like if you run them purely, they have their own disease, and those diseases happen. And so when people talk about like late capitalist disease, it's true. Like it really is happening. Like we're seeing our whole system of values kind of fall apart, and this kind of world of desire and little desires take over, and what it does to society, what it does to how we see the world, the environment, how we see nature, all of that is going on. And so they're right. But the idea of replacing that with like a tyrannical system of top-down distribution of wealth I don't think that's the solution either. Mm-hmm. So,
So you have a template it's partially intuitive and partially based on your learning. I think that there's both going on. I don't know to what extent you're aware which is which, but you're obviously very well studied, but you have an artistic sentiment. And I think that your storytelling in the moment, making sense out of any given set of phenomena, be it a TV show from Disney to a racy music video, you can just apply this thing, right?
Music video. Yeah.
I'm referring to something you released yesterday.
Yeah, just a recent video, the Montero.
Very well done. Very well done. So it seems like you have a template for a temple that can organize everything else underneath it.
So the idea, like the way that I see it, is that the patterns itself, or like the things that I'm pointing to, are not visible. Like they can't really be totally contained. And so it's just that they inform reality. And so the way you can only intuit them, but you can't totally describe them. So the idea is to help. One of the ways that I try to do it is to surprise people with examples that they didn't think were, like you said, I'll find an example from the Bible and then from some stupid music video. And then the fact that I can show you that those two things are talking about the same reality kind of gives you like an intuition of something above it, which is manifesting in these two different things. And so that's kind of, so it's not like, so you could say that the temple, for example, is definitely an image, a cosmic image of everything. But there are many images like that. Like there are many versions of that kind of cosmic image. But the image of a temple is definitely like a microcosm in terms of how it accounts for kind of all reality, even the breakdown of reality. One of the problems with a lot of the systems is that they don't account for the breakdown of the system. Whereas the kind of traditional symbolism actually accounts for the place where systems break down. So the idea of a hierarchy of being means that you also understand that on the edge of that, there are freaks, there are exceptions, there are all these things on the edge. And so it actually, and you can actually help people understand that. Like you can help people understand what the role of the freak is, or what the role of the strange is in kind of a meta system, I'd say. Mm-hmm. Whereas when we tend to think of the system, we tend to think of things that are totally contained and that all of it is named. But in the symbolic vision, there's also room for the unnamed and the unnameable, let's say, or the things that escape identification.
Yeah. But you do have like one symbol to rule them all. You do keep on pointing to Christ.
Yeah.
You say it explicitly.
Well, I think, the incarnation is definitely how can I say this? It definitely brings in everything into itself. And it does in a way that's very difficult to describe. Even the story itself, it's hard to contain it in your mind when you try to, because Christ contains sometimes these like wild opposites in the same story. And it can kind of, when you look at the story, it kind of can go by you and you don't realize it. But then when you start to attend to it, you realize what's going on in this story.
So wait, it's almost like you're describing something that's a system that's constantly breaking itself then, or constantly pulling itself out of systemization.
Maybe that's a good way of understanding, in the sense that Christ, you can see, let's say, in the pattern of the logos, you can kind of see the image of the temple, right, in his story. But then there's also all these things in his story that join the, let's say it this way, like let's say a temple has a holy place, and then it has a hierarchy where you'll have a priest that is holy to a certain extent, and then you have the people that are less holy, and then moving towards the outside. And the outside is usually understood as kind of chaos. But Christ actually does weird things where he joins the extremes together. And so it's like, so for example, like the cross is both the Holy of Holies and the outside of the temple at the same time. And it's there in the story. It's like, I'm not just saying that to sound smart. It's like in the story, you have a sense that what's going on is there's a joining of the extremes in one place.
Okay.
And so that's why the story of Christ is really difficult to hold in your mind, because it tends to span the entirety of everything.
And is that joining in itself something to do with this incarnation principle?
Well, you could say that he manifests the root of reality, and that root is kind of, it's transcendent. It can't be totally contained. And so it's always kind of pointing to something which is difficult to totally understand.
Okay.
And so that's the thing about Christ. And so what ends up happening, and maybe it's normal, is that people have their own little Jesus in their mind, and everybody kind of has their own little Jesus, and it's the kind of the aspect of Christ that they can hold on to. And so that's what sometimes leads to some of the problems in Christianity too, is that if people hold on to one aspect of Jesus, then they end up running into problems when they meet the people that have that other vision of Jesus, let's say. So like the idea that Christ is a king and is the ruler of all and is the judge of reality, all of that is true. But the idea that Christ is the lamb, is the humble, is the meek, is the victim, is all of that is also true at the same time. And so when you have people that hold on to one image mostly of Christ and then meet the other, then you've got a big problem.
Or a tremendous release of energy.
You hope so. That you would hope that it would be a positive, like when those things happen, when they encounter themselves, you have a kind of ecstatic vision, let's say.
Yeah. Well, okay, so insofar as you're trying to provide space for other people to do this work, so that this work of making sense of reality, let's say, continues beyond you, how do you impart to them the correct method, or let's just say how to be balanced in organizing? There's a lot of organization. This is basic organization. And human beings, our minds, our feelings, and our imaginations get really unwieldy, really quick.
Well, one of the things that first of all can help is that if you bounce your ideas off other people, that is definitely, like, people who think about symbolism and are just kind of alone in their own little world and just mull it over, they tend to go crazy after a while. It's not good. It's good to exchange. And then second of all, it's always about, so let's say the idea that there's a pattern, say the pattern of the temple, we can use that as an example, that pattern of a temple scales up and down. And so if you want to understand, so people will, let's say, read a story or watch a movie, and then they want to know whether the pattern they perceive is a real pattern, whether it's just their own imagination. Usually the way to do it is to see if it scales. So for example, does it scale in the movie itself? Let's say if you're watching a movie, that's one thing. So for example, like the overarching theme that you see, can you see it at lower levels in the movie? And so can you notice that the little actions that the main character are playing out the same pattern that you see at the larger scale? So that's one thing. But then also, does that pattern exist in other stories? So is it can you find it in other fairy tales, in other movies, and other stories? And if not, you're probably off, because the patterns are just the patterns of, or maybe not completely off, but you need to keep working at it, because these patterns, they're the very way you recognize a story usually. Like even the idea that the capacity you have to recognize that something has a beginning and an end, that something has a movement within it, that you recognize that these different events are related to each other, right? That it's not arbitrary. You can't just make that up. We have a way of attending to facts that make us understand that things are related to each other. And that's an objective thing. Or else you wouldn't be able, like if that didn't exist, you would walk outside and then all the millions of facts would just impose themselves on you in a way that you wouldn't be able to sift through. But the fact that we can do that means that there's a hierarchy of attention that we have, and that hierarchy has a shape, and you can describe it.
Okay. So, but that work is related to harvesting meaning. It can be creative in and of itself, and an adventure, a detective story, there's aspects of that too. But it seems like if you're going into a work of art with a premeditated plan, I'm going to show the archetypical monomyth or whatever, it's going to be very monotone. There is
But hopefully it's not, because that monomyth is just not good enough.
there's blindness in creativity. There's an energy, a transcendent energy, like a boiling passion or something like that, that I need to anchor myself in and let the meaning happen afterward. What are your thoughts on that aspect of it? And how does that relate to that sowing of meaning relate to the harvesting of meaning?
I totally agree. I totally agree with you. So a lot of people ask me about that. They'll tell me things like, I'm trying to write a story, let's say, and I'm really struggling to put the symbolism in the story. And I'm like, dude, you got it wrong. Don't do that. That's not the right way to go about it. You have to obey the rules of the things you're doing, like in the moment that you're doing it, in the sense that you're creating. And then, like, let's say you're writing a story, then you should not think about symbolism when you're writing your story. And once you've written, let's say, your first draft, then you can go back and do some editing if you need to. But while you're writing, you wouldn't want to think about symbolism because it'll cripple you. And that's what happens. People get totally crippled by their desire to insert symbolism into their story. That the story has its own logic, and then once you see it, then that logic, you can fine tune it later, right, to make it more what it is. But it's not about trying to jam symbolism into the story. It's not gonna. You're not gonna be very successful if you try to do that.
Well, what is the symbolism of that point of being, that creative point of being? That it sounds blind to me in a way that the symbolist or the interpreter, the hermeneut, is really looking at things. The poet, in the broadest sense of the one who assembles, the one who makes, is blind to that. So what is the stance, or can you express and explore what are the qualities of that?
Well, for sure, the symbolist is second tier. I often the people don't realize that one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because the world is so messed up. This is not a natural way of going about things. Like understanding symbolism is a second-hand thing. That's not what it's. Traditional societies didn't have like science of symbolism. Why would they do that? They don't need that. They're living inside of a pattern, and they're living it, right? They're expressing it. They're embodying it, let's say. And so it's only in the breakdown, let's say, it's only at the end that all of a sudden first of all, you can talk about it because you're moving away from it. And second of all, maybe you need to talk about it if you don't want to get lost in the darkness, or if you want to get lost in the brokenness. Because as the pattern kind of breaks down, let's say as society fragments and as identities fragment, there's an opportunity there, but there's a big danger of just getting lost, and then not finding your way. So the idea of from that moment of chaos and breakdown to be able to point to the line, to point to the pieces of bread that have been dropped along the way, that's kind of what I think the work of the symbolist would be. Okay. But that's not enough. And you're right. That's not sufficient.
Yeah.
That's why I tell people, like, I kind of joke around, and I'm not joking, I'm serious, but I tell people, you can watch my videos all you want, but at some point you have to go to church. Like you have to sing, you have to embody, you have to live it. You can't just think about it, or else it's not going to give you anything. It's going to be, but it can be, it's a good wake up for people that are kind of in the chaotic breakdown, but it's not enough. That's for sure.
Yeah. Is it Fukuyama that wrote then The End of History? I think in the late 90s. There's an author who wrote about the end of history, post-Soviet, post-Cold War. Maybe he was right and we're stuck in the footnotes now.
Well, history's coming back pretty fast.
Fair enough.
It's like, I don't know. I mean, I think I understand what he meant, but I think that it's coming back in the sense that there's a breakdown that's going on. There's a breakdown of the story, and it has a function, but it's not. It didn't lead to this kind of just stasis, utopian stasis that he thought maybe what he thought he was talking about. Like it doesn't lead to Star Trek. I know you. A lot of people think it leads to Star Trek. It doesn't. It doesn't lead to a world with like Christian values without religion, where you explore the world with these Christian values. Like that doesn't happen.
That brings up something that kind of initiated this particular conversation. Richard Dawkins asked a question about why one person can't change races, but they can change sex or gender, whatever you want to say. And then that got some blowback, and he's like, well, I retract my question because I don't want to be allied with those bigots on the Republican side. And then a bunch of his colleagues, or this humanist association, so-called, said, oh, we don't want to be allied with Richard Dawkins because he's a bigot now. And it was an aspect of what we perceive as the dark side of religion, the judgmental side, the part that condemns and casts out and makes a scapegoat and says this is impure and distances that person. And I went to the humanist website, and they had their explanation of what humanism is to them. And it was a bunch of like anecdotes or personal representations that were very quotidian is the word, very puffed up on these really great sounding ideas. It had all of this very fruitful, we are free from superstition. We can love each other through science and objective reality. And it sounds really good on paper, but it doesn't taste good to me. But I don't know if that's just because my tastes are different. Than that. What are some of your? Because what I saw was that, well, they're going to impose some sort of religious moral order, and they've latched onto it with social justice. Social justice has provided atheism and humanism with that moral code, scrubbed of all this religious symbolism. What is missing when you get away from that symbolism is some sort of guidance through this structure. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the end of humanity?
I mean, I think that for sure, it's like it's hard for me not to. I don't want to be Schadenfreude, but it's just hard for me not to feel that with the New Atheist, because they kind of brought about this world, but they didn't realize that it wasn't enough. Like they just said, we just need to get rid of religion, and then we'll all be fine. But they introduced the world to social justice. Like they opened the door to social justice, and now they're getting devoured by their own child, let's say.
Could you just define what you mean by social justice in this context, or what they created? Well,
in the sense that atheism isn't enough, right? You need something. Maybe it could have been something else. It's possible, but there's something about this kind of materialism and this kind of revolutionary. Because one of the aspects of materialism is that it's you could say that it's revolutionary in its very pattern. That is, it's trying to say that reality stems from below, right? Reality stems out of matter, and that the patterns are just this superstitious, superimposed thing that we put on there. Okay, but this revolutionary way of thinking, it has a reality, and it plays itself out. And it plays itself out by a succession of revolutions. And so the social justice is like the final revolution. It's the last revolution, because it's basically saying we want to take the most rejected thing and make it king. Like we want to identify the most marginalized, most rejected, most strange, most the thing that has the less identity possible, the least identity. And then we want to make that the king. But obviously Dawkins, when he was trying to reduce the world to genes, didn't understand that that's what he was bringing about. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. When you try to stem reality from below, it's going to play itself out in terms of meaning. And the final version of that is that. So you could say that it's just another version of the tyranny of the proletariat, right? It's just another version of the idea that which is the lowest has to become king. And so now it's playing out in terms of identity instead of in terms of social class, but it doesn't matter. It's in terms of the story, it's the same. Okay. And materialism is part of that rung. It's part of that game, even if they don't realize that's what's going on. Like one of the absurdity of Dawkins' like proposal to make the entire world an expression of genes is just so absurd. It's absurd in the sense that this denial of patterns, or this denial that there is a top-down layout of how the thing works. That's why I mean that it's just kind of this. It's funny to watch him then get eaten by his own process.
Okay,
but in a social manner, because he tried to avoid the social question. He's like, I just proposing this biological thing. Like I'm just proposing this scientific thing. I've even heard interviews with him where he says that, when in terms of social questions, I defer to the sociologists and I defer to those people. But dude, like I said, the pattern is happening, and it's happening to you in society. So the version of his selfish gene, of this lower reality, coming up and ruling over, let's say, top-down structure. Now it's playing out in the social fear, and he doesn't see that it's the same thing. He doesn't see that now he's being devoured by his own story.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a tide with 1,000 eddies, by which I mean you take that major revolution of instead of this transcendent reigning over the immanent or the bottom, you do that turn first, and then it works out on every sub pattern afterwards. Yeah. Every single pattern. Just like you were saying with the story. How does it work out if we do it here? If I do this privilege politic in this training right here, how's that going to work out on every level of my organization? Just for example, you can understand it in terms of so for example, like whether people agree with this or not, like it doesn't matter. So you have this, like in terms of just understanding the pattern, like let me draw out a pattern for you. Okay. So you have this idea that, let's say, the spiritual authority, the priests, the prophets, they get their authority from God. Yeah.
Okay. And then they usually don't have physical power. So the priestly caste, they don't have an army. They're not supposed to, or like let's say the Brahmins in India don't have a physical power, right? And then they confer some authority down to the level below them. Let's say the politicians, the kings, the warriors, or whatever. Usually, what happens, and you can see it like when the political class tries to take power from the spiritual class. So in the Middle Ages, you see that as the King of France trying to subject the Pope to him, killing the Templars, all of that kind of stuff that happened in the late Middle Ages, or making state churches, trying to subject the church to the authority of the politician. What happens is that then the political power doesn't have a legitimizing structure. It doesn't have a way to legitimize its authority. Because
how does that play out then?
Then it plays out that the ones below them say, well, you don't have authority over me. Like, where does your authority come from? And so they try to take it for themselves. Okay. And so the bourgeois will revolt against the aristocracy, and then it just keeps going like that. Like it's just a revolution. So, but that happens you could say that it happens at every level of reality. A good example that I've been trying to help people understand, which is very simple, which is like the idea of like the liberation of sexuality. Right? The liberation of sexuality. People say we don't need sexuality to be submitted to let's say reproduction, or to be submitted to family and to fruitful production of a continuation of life. And they think this is going to free us, going to make us happy. It starts like that, and then through a series of revolutions, it ends with some loner guy sitting in his basement addicted to some very strange fetishistic porn where he can't get off without this weird little thing that he has to be and it's like that's the result of the liberation of sexuality. Because it's like this series of revolutions where if you don't submit to something higher, it ends up things take from them, and then you end up with
I stepped in that electrified puddle by suggesting there was this very strange video, maybe you saw it, and it was just a clip of this young female who doesn't want to be called a woman or referred to as she, speaking about how going to the abortion clinic, it was very hurtful. It was like being slapped every 2 seconds or something like that because they were ignoring her desired pronouns. And I just said, well, the life that's being, we've revolted from life, and now sex doesn't mean anything. Even biological sex, not even the act doesn't mean anything, but the actual sex category, that doesn't mean anything. If you don't think that those two things are related, you're not looking at the picture. And I know it's not I'm not saying that one thing is good or bad. I'm just saying that this whole mess is related to unmooring ourselves from an anchor.
Yeah, and that video, I mean, it was something like mythological about it, because the fact that she was going to get an abortion it just like cinched the whole thing about what sexuality is for. It's like it's like a little microcosm. I was like, deny what let's say the purpose of, or one of the purposes of sexuality, deny that, and then right away it like tumbled into like, none of this means anything except for my own kind of solipsistic will of what I am and what I want people to say that I am, you know? So,
I think that's something that your video about Little Nas, is that
Little Nas X?
Is
that how you pronounce it? Yeah.
I don't know. I do not know. But your video explored his video where he participates in very mythological framing, and you even complimented him on like a thorny gate. Yeah, he was really on point. But one thing that stood out was that it's all about the self. The ultimate revolution comes down to, well, it's just me and my own will above everything else. And so I can only interact with everything if it comes in the form of me, if it comes in my own shape, which I've seen in the Evergreen documentary. There's this very powerful individual who's at the center of a lot of the unrest, is very just seeing their own self and everything that's going on, can't ever break out of their own self. And it really speaks to the narcissism that is really boosted by the way that we're connecting with each other through media, through social media, et cetera, like that. What is like the first step to like revolting against that pattern, like really revolting against it and stopping it and turning it back around?
Well,
because you hinted, like, you said the selfless individual.
I can tell you, people are gonna like it. It's worship. Like, that's what it is. It's recognizing that which is above you. Just at least recognizing it. Like recognizing. So you can see it like as simple as, you know, the idea of like, why is it that AA works? And AA first works because the first thing they tell you is you need to recognize that there's something bigger than you. And that's the solution. The problem, that's what was the problem in the first place, in the story, in the biblical story, the idea of like taking the apple for yourself, right? Of saying that I am God and that I can make myself God. That's where it all starts to tumble. But if you recognize that which is above you, then all of a sudden you can find your proper place, and then you can see that, because we're all, let's not even say God, like let's get lower, because God is so high that people are just think I'm talking about a sky daddy. It's like, okay, so let's talk about playing hockey or playing baseball, right? You're in a team, and if you want the team to coexist and you want people to start being narcissistic, you need to focus on the thing for which the team is bound together. So if you focus on winning the championship and playing baseball as best as you can, then the team can exist as a cohesive whole. But if people start to forget that, and the players start to think just about their Lamborghinis and their girlfriends and their little solipsistic world and their prima donna existence, then the team's going to, even if the players are the best players, the team's going to break down, and they're not going to accomplish the goal that they wanted to accomplish in the first place. And so that's what I mean, is that the solution is always to see what is above us, which binds us together. And if we can do that, then we get pulled out of our kind of self-referential narcissistic space, you know. But ultimately that does lead to God, but we can understand it at lower levels if God is too difficult to talk about.
Well, okay, let's for the moment let's parenthesize. Let's put into brackets those people who can't think of God as anything other than the sky daddy, or think about it negatively in that way. What are some of the problems that believers have, especially young believers? People are saying, okay, there is a God, I need to worship. what is this thing? There's some snags and trips in that conception. And what is some of the underbrush that needs to be cleared up when somebody's ready to go down the path of committing to worship?
Yeah. Well, especially now, because one of the problems we have now is a narcissistic form of Christianity too, which is that people say, I recognize there's a God, but God is basically my servant. I'm not going to say that, but I act that way. Like I act as if God is there to fill my needs, right? So I go to church to fill my needs, and I go to church to get something, whether it is, and the thing is that you will always get something from that. But if you focus just on the things you get, then at some point it's the same kind of narcissism is going to break down.
Okay.
Right. And so, because if you do that, then what's going to happen is if life doesn't go the way you want it to, you're right away going to doubt your faith, right? Because you got sick, or because your best friend died, or because these hard things are happening to you. It's like, well, I doubt my faith because basically I thought that the ultimate source of reality was there to serve me and to make me feel good about myself. And so that's one of the big issues that people have, I think, in terms of kind of contemporary Christianity, where that's how they wouldn't necessarily say it out loud, but you can see by the way people are acting and interacting that they tend to think that way.
What's the proper way of folding that suffering into faith rather than using it as a means of escape?
I mean, I think humility, it's tough. It's like I'm judging myself when I say that. I'd be careful, man. Careful what I say, because it's a tough road to go down. Accepting, like, just the idea of accepting the lot that you have, I think, accepting what's going on doesn't mean that you're not going to do anything about it, right? Doesn't mean you're not going to try to work on what's going on, but it's like just accepting that this is what I've got, like this is the reality that is there. But it's tough. That's a tough thing to do sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And why do people react so strongly to worship? You brought it up to Jordan Peterson in your conversation. There's a slight feeling, twinge, wariness. It might be kind of Western, kind of like, don't tell me what to do. I don't know what it is. And not in Mr. Peterson specifically.
No. But you're right. I understand it. Well, first of all, there's definitely our whole culture. Our whole culture is like a culture of the celebration of the rebel. Like that's our entire culture. That's what it is.
Oh, let's put up our collars for that.
That's right. So this kind of celebration of rebellion the punk attitude, this punk attitude. So the idea of worship is the very opposite of that. It's saying, I'm going to lower myself. I'm going to look up. I'm going to recognize that which is above me. And so it's very difficult for us to accept that as possible. But we do it. The thing is that we do it anyways. We're going to worship anyways. Everybody worships. It's just the problem is that if you do it unconsciously, then that's called addiction, right? If you worship unconsciously, that's when you fall into addiction, because you don't realize what's going on and you're worshiping pleasure, or you're worshiping this or that. And then it sucks you in, and then it makes you its slave. So that's why I'm saying, like, ultimately you want to be deliberate about what you worship rather than just be accidental.
Yeah. You have to be careful, because you're going to be shaped into the shape of what you are worshiping. If you worship a stone object, you'll slowly kind of turn into that stone object. You'll turn into whatever pattern you adulate that will come to engulf all of you.
And that's easy. You know what heroin looks like, right? Everybody knows what heroin looks like. Everybody knows what an alcoholic looks like. It actually physically transforms you. Like, everybody knows what a prideful person looks like. That's why we have these. That's why you can play it in a movie, right? You can play a prideful person and we'll recognize that. But some people become that, and it changes their face. Like, they actually physically become the thing that they worship. Yeah. And so it's a reality. Like, the thing that you worship will, like you said, will mold you into its image.
Yeah. But there are still patterns that are greater than us that aren't God. There are there are transcendent modes of being, something that greater than thought, greater than feeling, that still aren't God. They're greater than us. They're on the way, maybe, but they can get distracting from us. Do you agree with that? I've found that myself. How do you know what's God and not just
that's tough.
Something that's greater than you?
Well, so the idea is that anything, like any good, is always of limited value. So any good, any good you can recognize, even the virtues, and that's tough. That's tough because, it's so funny because I was reading this morning. I was reading The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, a great book, by the way. It's really good. And he was talking about where he talked about how sometimes lower passions that seem virtuous at the outset, like let's say the love of your child, like that's a good thing. Like loving your child is a good thing, but because it is an actual good, it's almost like more dangerous than, let's say, your lust, because lust, you give into lust and you kind of know that it's not good. Like you kind of know that it's bad for you.
It exhausts itself pretty quickly too.
Yeah, it kind of, and so you're in this thing and you kind of know you need to get out. But if you love your child, you can trick yourself into thinking that this love is the absolute good, and all the sacrifices you make for the love of your child is good. But it not necessarily. It can reach a limit, right, where you are going beyond the pale in the love of your child, where you're actually trying to suck the child into you. You're trying to devour the child. And so it's harder to awaken from these kind of offset virtues. It's more difficult. It's like you have these images of monks, this image of the holy ladder, where you see these monks going up a ladder towards God. And you see even that really high up on the ladder, you see these demons pulling them down into hell. And you realize that, oh man, you can do everything for pride, every virtue you can do out of pride. And then it's the last test, whether or not you're just doing it out of self glory,
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about that, because I expose so much of myself through recording myself and publishing it on the internet, which is rather exposing. Yeah. And at any moment and constantly, I'm always one step from falling off. And the higher I get, the more eyes I achieve, the greater my fall will be. Let's just say the more people will be accusing me of wrongdoing, and I will have to bear that guilt or that shame. It magnifies as my path becomes successively greater. And there's ways of tricking myself out of that, but there's a reality to that. And and I was thinking, how do I keep my balance? How do I keep my balance? And I remembered this dream that I had about 20 years ago. I had this conversation with a close friend about heaven and hell, and we were talking about the reality of that. And so I was thinking about that, and then I had this dream that I was actually in hell, and everything was pain and suffering, and below me was this brick path. And the only way that I could stay on the path out was to be completely calm and completely relaxed. And not respond to the pain, not magnify that pain and that suffering, and just very humbly, very quietly follow that trail out. So, no matter how high you get, there's an antidote to pride is, if you say that pride is the ultimate test, you have to have the antidote embedded in every one of your patterns, every one of your movements, even between your patterns and the breaths that you take. You need to be constantly remembering that. Yeah,
but it's tough. For us, I would say, like you said, it's a difficult situation. I feel it all the time in terms of the fact that we have these public personas, and then sometimes you talk to someone and you see in their eyes something which is scary, and it's dangerous. It's you almost want this is dangerous for me. Get away. You want it to. You almost want to push it away, or sometimes you don't. You want it. Because it feels, it gives you. So I think that's one of my biggest. It's one of my biggest fears, because I'm not a humble person. Like it just naturally, I'm just not. I think anybody who's watched my videos will see that sometimes it comes out like I'm not a humble person. And so it's like, anyways, I just hope God will preserve me through this, because sometimes it's, especially like in the past few weeks, it's been Lent is the worst. Like Lent is the worst. Like you can follow my Twitter feed. When you see me start to say certain types of things, you're like, okay, Jonathan, it's not doing well. It's like, it usually is just like this kind of arrogance and pride that comes out.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah. I'm doing Ramadan right now, and there's different levels to it. There's the very basic level is just cutting out food during the day.
Mm-hmm.
But then, the next level down is like, well, cutting out being proud, cutting out being petty, arguing, snarkiness, gossip. Gossip is a big one, like different behaviors. You start to take a break from different behaviors in the hopes that you're preparing the ground for kind of a renewing of your heart, a renewing of your awareness, so that you can actually examine your basic code. Not that you can necessarily change it, but at least you're becoming aware of it. And that.
So are you Muslim? Like, when did this happen?
No, I'm not Muslim. My spiritual group, the founder of it was Muslim. He came from Java, Indonesia, and he just said that it's a good thing. If you're a Christian, do Lent. If you're Muslim, do Ramadan. It's really good. It's a necessary part of development. And because most people in this group did Ramadan, I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense to me. I tried it out, and
how's it
fasting.
going?
Sunset. I kind of messed up because I got the second vaccine on Saturday, and it wrecked me. It absolutely wrecked me. So I had to break my fast on Sunday and a little bit on Monday. I had to end it soon. So I have to kind of get back on the path. But it has been historically very good for me. And I didn't do it for a number of years. And then for some reason, I did it during lockdown last year. And as soon as it was over, it's based on the lunar cycle. So it shifts 12 or 15 days. And it ended. It cleaned me out. It was a really difficult one. I had a lot of stuff that I was just feeling crappy. I had to get a lot of stuff out. It ended, and then the whole world blew up, and Evergreen became national. And like, I was really in the right space to start to speak about and operate from a certain level and to observe what was going on from a certain level. So it was really, I was lucky that it was timed correctly.
Yeah. Well, I've been curious about that, about how you're dealing with this, because basically 2016 and 2020, it's like 2020 was like a macro version of what was going on in 2016. And so, even in terms of Evergreen, in terms of like the whole Brett and Jordan Peterson stuff, all that happened during that time. It's as if now it's gone national. And so I've been curious about how you see that, like how you perceive what's going on.
Well, people send me articles like, here's another place that's doing the same thing. And I'm kind of tired of it now. I'm like, I mapped out the pattern. I told it in wonderfully cringeful detail, like the most cringe-worthy compilation of footage. I went the distance. I don't know if there's anything else to do, but let it play out. So I feel in my heart very worried when I look at what's going on. I feel very worried that the gender issue, especially what is happening through the medical establishment and children imprinting these ideas into the bodies of youth is very troublesome to me. And I don't know how to encapsulate my worry except for taking breaks from it. So I don't know exactly what to do, but I'm very, very worried when I look at the state of the world. But I trick myself into saying it's going to exhaust itself. It's really going to exhaust itself. And the problem is to build the ladders of people that wake up before they hit rock bottom or when they are in rock bottom to walk out. So that's the only thing that I can really do is help people out when they're ready to get out, but I can't stop it.
Yeah. I think you have the same intuition as I do in terms of saying, like, trying to build like a bastion or a seed or something for rebuilding after all of this is kind of played out. But like you said, it's like you were just watching it happen. It's like a tidal wave, and you're like, what are you going to do? You can't stop it anymore. It's too late. And it's like we had these weird warning signs, I guess. It really does feel like 2016 was like this bell that rang, and some people heard it. Some people did hear it. It's not like it went completely unheard, but now it's playing out at the now the wave is actually there.
It's kind of beautiful in a way, like how terrible it is.
Well, there's something like I said, there's something ecstatic about the reenchantment, and it's real. Like it's like all of a sudden you can almost see the demons like entering back into the world.
If you look, you can see the saints coming down too. You can.
That's what I hope. I hope that it's all happening, and that there'll be some bright lights that are shining, in this kind of this reopening of the world to these patterns. So that's the hope, and I think it's happening. I've been really surprised to see people I didn't expect at all, like complete kind of secular atheists, all of a sudden surprise me with some of the things they're saying, or surprise me with some of the actions they're taking, and so so I think that we can use those as little joys to kind of bring us forward and to keep going, and to see like, okay, yeah, so there is something happening. Like, even though I see this kind of darkness creeping in, like I can see these little specks of light peek through. And so hold on to that and just kind of use that as a footpath to keep going.
Is there, I think part of your work is to make the sacred secular in a way. And I think part of Jordan Peterson's phenomenon, not as an individual, not as a psychologist, but just as a phenomenon, which is undeniable that whatever he was doing, he tapped into something really big. And he still is doing something really big. So just abstracting from his phenomena, he's bringing these two things close enough for this charge to start to arc. And I think it's like a religious understanding and a materialist understanding. And I think that I think religion needs to be renewed. And I think that our material knowing has given us a lot. We cannot deny it. We can't walk away from it, but it needs to be brought into some sort of order. And I think that what you're doing is filling in the gaps of at least with artistically, like there are these patterns, like these breadcrumbs that are leading us back to some sort of correct stance between us and the God or whatever is outside of the frame. Whether or not people are going to be able to set aside their pride before it breaks them is another question. But if people are ready for re-entering into the church and just say, okay, I'll go. Like, what do you think the church needs to do to be ready or to be welcoming?
I mean, I think that for sure, I think that the church is struggling to understand what it's for, because all the stuff that's going on in the world is happening in the church as well. It's like this kind of weird infection, sorry to use that word, but like this kind of inflow of social justice thinking is there in the church too. And so a lot of people, they think like, okay, I've kind of understood these patterns. I've understood this kind of mythical framework, and I want to kind of re-enter into the church to re-experience or to reinvigorate my life. And then they enter the church, and they have people that are like pushing them out. They're people saying, it's all about morality, and it's all about, the environment, or it's all about these kind of social justice issues. And that's really what Christianity is about. And so they're like, well, I thought I was it's like, I thought I was moving into something more. And now you're telling me that this is what's going on. And so I think that's a difficulty that people are going to face as they want to kind of re-enter into a more sacred life, or a kind of sacramental life, you could say, is that they're going to encounter people who resist that. They're going to encounter priests and bishops that don't actually want that. So it's not easy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So this virus, sorry to use that term.
But it's a right term, because I don't know if you saw my video I did on how postmodernism is a virus, and I just show that it's the postmodern theorists use the viral image as their own image. Like, they're saying that we are a virus, and so it's not completely wrong to say that, because it's actually assumed by the activists themselves. So
yeah. Well, right. It replicates itself in every hierarchical organization. This isn't true, but one of my friends said that I can tell if you're woke if you have more than one boss. If you have to report to somebody that reports to somebody, you're going to have to start to conform. And I think he was intuitively saying that this infects conformity. It's very good at enforcing conformity. And a certain layer, like the satanic or the lowest layer of a hierarchical organization, is conformity to the organization. And this virus mimics that. That's one of its connecting principles. It mimics conformity by these HR representative meetings, by this propriety. It enforces a certain propriety. This is good speak. This is bad speak. This is proper and improper behavior, which is all about conformity. So it's very adept to jump from Nike to the Presbyterian Church. It doesn't matter what the organization serves, whether it's shoes or God. The organization itself will be very easily infected by this. I think that's a rough sketch, but I think that there's a lot of
the way to recognize it is to see that it replaces whatever the purpose of the hierarchy is with inclusion.
Yes,
that is, inclusion becomes the top value of any structure. And so if it's a football team that's purpose is to play football, inclusion is more important than playing football. If it's any organization, it's like, I think it was even Justin Trudeau that said that. He said inclusion is our only value. He said Canada is a post-national nation and inclusion is our only value. Diversity is our only value, or something like that. Like something inclusion and diversity is our only value. And you think like, that's actually, it's like, that'll actually destroy the world. Like that will really, it will just destroy reality. That virus will eat up the world, because a purpose of a basketball team is to play basketball.
Yeah.
If you make it into, and to win, but if you make inclusion its first purpose, it's going to destroy basketball.
Yeah.
And it's like that for every organization. Like inclusion is an aspect, is an important aspect of an organization, because what it does, in the sense that it opens up potentiality for whatever you're doing. So if let's say you're playing basketball, like to have a level of inclusion on the margin of your team is useful, because it means you're capable of recognizing the potential that you can draw in from the outside to accomplish your goal.
Yeah.
But if inclusion is your top priority, then you destroy basketball, because that's not what basketball is.
What is it about inclusion that allowed it? Diversity, equity, inclusion, those three things. What is it about those intuitively, or do you see something about those that allowed them to become so?
That's because that's what it is, the destruction of hierarchy itself. It's the destruction of identity. Inclusion without identity is the destruction of identity.
Well, and why is that so powerful? Why are so many people adopting that? What's so infectious about that?
Well, it's the end of the end of the revolutionary process.
Okay.
It's this whole process, like since the Enlightenment, even before, like this whole thing, it's playing itself out. And now we're reaching like the final fruits. And the final fruits are this kind of weird satanic upside down world where it's basically, it's like, it's death. It's that diversity without unity is decomposition. That's what it is. It is death. And so it's like people are going to think if people are going to think it's funny, it's worshiping death. And so people will say, oh, you're just being, no, that's what worshiping diversity is, worshiping death. And you can see, because people who worship diversity hate identities, and they love only the identities they can use as a weapon to destroy identity. And so that's why they love the most marginal identity possible, because they're just using it as a weapon to destroy any form of identity. And so identity becomes weaponized to destroy identity. And this idea of diversity becomes this love of the multiple without unity. And it ends up being the destruction of the world.
Yeah.
But it doesn't play out that way, because it's like the world, it ends up playing out as an upside down hierarchy. It ends up becoming this weird world where the exception is king, where the jester is king. But it's a how can I say this? It's not something that can last very long, right? Mm-hmm. The carnival, you can't sustain the world with a carnival.
Yeah, it's got to go. Something with this way it came and went eventually.
Yeah, and so I think that's what's going on. It really is the last part of this game, this whole process of revolution. And people, it's as if we've been telling people, how about this? We've been telling people for generations that the underdog is how reality works. Like, that's the value is the underdog, and there is a value in that story. But if that's the only story, it has a self-contradictory thing, because once the underdog, like at the end of the movie, right? Once the underdog wins, he's not the underdog anymore. There's an other underdog coming for him. We cut the movie there, but the pattern shows you there's always another underdog, and you keep going until you reach the ultimate underdog that is the most marginalized, most excluded possible person you can think of. And then that's the final crown. Like, put that crown on your head.
Okay. I guess this is a trick question. I just played it out of my mind, but maybe I'll have you vocalize it. You bring up the underdog, mythological story, like very at the root of our civilization, David and Goliath. It doesn't end with David killing Goliath. David goes on this huge arc of development. He eventually becomes the king within his own domain. How is that a better resolution than this continual revolution?
Okay, so David is David is a great story to understand how to solve the problem of revolution. And so David, first of all, the giant that David kills is not his own. It's not his king, right? It's not the one above him. It's the strange. It's the outside, right? It's this kind of strange thing which is coming to invade him. But because of that, and partly not necessarily because of that, but because of the virtue that David has and the fact that the king is corrupt, David gets named the secret king. So David is the secret king, and King Saul, who is this corrupt king, is not doing well. But David says, "I will not kill the king." And so in all of David's arc, he refuses to harm the king, even though the king tries to kill him constantly. So Saul is trying to kill David, and David just refuses to kill the king. And that's why he becomes king. That's really
messes things up when he gets up there. He becomes a fallen king in and of himself.
Well, he doesn't do so bad. Like he's obviously not perfect, but he doesn't do so bad in the sense that he does centralize Israel, and he does found Jerusalem as a holy city, and he does bring the ark and plan the temple. So there is this sense that he establishes a stable thing for at least a while.
Yeah. And then how does Christ become the son of King David? Then how does that step, which you assert is the final step?
And so Christ let's say Christ takes the story of David and maximizes it, you could say. And so it's the same thing where you have this sense that Christ has the power to take over Rome. And so you see that in the story where he's being tempted by the devil, where the devil says, brings him to the top of the temple, brings him to the top of, and says, you could be king over all of this. You could take all of this. I could, if you just serve me, then all of this is yours, this whole world. And then Christ refuses that. And he accepts to rather become small and to die. And then that's why he is the king. That's why he becomes king. So it seems like a self-contradictory thing. But if you understand the problem of the pattern of revolution, then you realize that ends up being the solution. That self-sacrifice is the solution to revolution. That if you sacrifice yourself, then you will be raised up, if you will. But if you try to take the power for yourself and you try to lord it over others just out of your own power, then you'll be taken up by others that are watching you, from the corners, because your legitimacy won't be real. Right? And so it's like the greatest version of that happened in recent culture, for example, is in Lord of the Rings. You have this ring, right? And you have this ring of power, and you have all these characters that think that if I could get the ring of power for myself, then I would use it for good, right? And so you have these different characters pondering about, like, maybe I could take the ring and then use it to help the world. But you know that if they do that, as soon as they take the ring for themselves, then they'll be corrupted by the power of the ring. Now, take the Avengers movie, the last Avengers movie. It's the same story. It's not a ring, it's a gauntlet. Who cares what the actual image of it? Yeah. But you have this ultimate power, this gauntlet. And, and then Thanos is using it to basically mold the world to his will. And he wants to destroy everything to rebuild it in his own image, or the ultimate image of pride. And so you would think, like, what do you do? Like, how do you solve the problem? And then Tony Stark solves the problem. He does take the ring. He takes the ring, he takes the gauntlet, and he uses it, but he uses it as self-sacrifice. If he didn't die at that moment, then the story couldn't have resolved itself. He had to die. Huh. He had to use the ultimate power in a moment where he knew that he was going to die.
Yeah. So the movie goes on, but you're the one that ends, so the movie can go on in a way. Instead of cutting the movie off at you becoming king, you cut yourself off. So that there won't be. But then you would think, ultimately he reaches the purpose of his own arc, right? He actually reaches the end of his own arc, which is this selfish, kind of arrogant person, who was also like basically well, he's iron. He's the lowest metal. He becomes being.
He was also like a weapon. He was a weapon salesman for the beginning at the beginning of his arc. So he actually ends up using the ultimate weapon, this like glove, which is kind of like his armor, to sacrifice himself for the world. And so he kind of solves his own arc. But it's mostly to understand that pattern, like that's actually the pattern. And so if you let's say as a father in your family, if you sacrifice your desires, your little passions for your children and for your wife and for the people around you, then you're actually going to gain it all in a way. You're surprisingly going to find yourself experiencing more joy, more fulfillment. Than if you said, these kids are annoying me. I just need time for myself. I need to care for myself. I need to get my own pleasures. And then that runs amok very quickly. It's like the weird mystery of reality, which is itself like true self-denial, and like not in a like kind of like a weird animosity or this kind of weird, let's say resentful way, but like true self-denial actually leads to more fulfillment. It's weird, but it actually, think of the times where you've done that. Like it's actually true.
Have you seen Midsommar yet?
I haven't. No, I haven't seen that.
I think that is probably the most profound movie of the decade, and I would love to hear your thoughts on that one. It's absolutely horrific, and
it's like a horror movie, right?
It's brilliant. You will make so much hay out of it. I want to make a video on it, but I'd rather you make the video on it. It describes almost explicitly, and this is my reading, the end of Christianity, regressing away from Christianity and completely just divorcing society from the rule of Christendom. And what we're left with, it's terrible.
Interesting.
It's absolutely terrible. And the director, I don't know what he was thinking or smoking, but he just hit it. He just hit it out of the park on that one.
Interesting. Well, there are a few. I don't watch a lot of horror movies because it takes me a long time to recover from them sometimes.
Yeah.
But I remember there was a movie that was like that. It was that movie, what's it called? Cabin in the Woods by Josh Whedon.
Joss Whedon?
Yeah, by Joss Whedon. And I don't think he did it on purpose, but he really played out this world like we're in. It's like this whole dark reality of sacrifice where you have to sacrifice someone, and then it ends not with self-sacrifice, but this just like refusal to sacrifice anything, and this like pothead refusing to sacrifice, and then it's like, here come the giants. It's like, you caused the end of the world, and somehow it's presented almost like we should have sympathy for the main character, but it's like, what's happening? And it was very strange, like exactly like you said, like this strange like flooding in of this like pre-Christian world into reality and what that means, and especially what it means in a world of like narcissism and like self-pleasuring. Like how is that? It's basically bringing about the end of reality, and it's like that movie is like a strange acknowledgement of that somehow.
Yeah, you brought up something very similar with WandaVision. I don't want to spoil your video or spoil WandaVision, but you guys are fairly warned, where it shows it shows evil as a sympathetic character in a way where it's like Disney-fied evil. And I wonder if the MCU, so-called the Marvel Cinematic Universe, now that it's taking this turn, will now go forward and just glorify the antithesis of the good, dress it up as the good things, the celebration of these weird kind of base aspects of reality. I wonder if that's just part of the cycle that you kind of have to do.
It's possible, because they've been playing that for a while. They had Maleficent, and now they have this Cruella movie, and WandaVision seems to be part of that. I don't totally get it. Like, I don't totally understand. I see what's going on, but it's almost hard to imagine that they're doing it on purpose. Maybe it's like, maybe I'm just too. I don't think people have such bad will, but it's very odd, this celebration of like the female tyrant. Like, really, like it starts out with like Moana. And it's like, it's kind of
the rebel.
It's kind of subtle. Yeah. It's like subtle. And it's like, you see Moana kind of humiliating this male god. And it's like, okay, it's a little subtle. And then it grows, and it ends with this like celebration of this like female tyrant that tortures people in order to preserve her own solipsistic world. And you think, like, is that a conscious arc that you're going on, or are you just? I don't understand how we can be there. Like, how is it that we got there?
Yeah,
it's disturbing.
What's the end game of the female tyrant pattern? Can you kind of dictate how that kind of just logically or dream logically works out?
I mean, what the tyrannical mother, how it plays out?
Yeah. What's after? Yeah, well, it's not pretty. But is it fecund in a way? Like it doesn't clear the ground?
It's not. Like all breakdowns clear the ground in a way. It's just, it can be very painful. It can take a while. Like, a lot of people will tell me this. Like, a lot of people tell me, well, I understand, and I agree. They say this pattern can't hold. It's not real, and so it has to break down. But how long did USSR last? It lasted quite a while, and a lot of tens of millions of people got tortured and killed before we reached the end of this false pattern. And so it doesn't mean, even though it's a false pattern, it will impose itself more violently for it being false. And so it's not necessarily going to get prettier.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess we keep on looking at the abyss, and what's to end where we began? What's on your plate? What's next coming up? You're starting these groups. Is there another project or something that you're rallying your concentration or investing your attention into?
I think right now I'm mostly trying to kind of streamline things, just so that because I'm doing a lot of things at the same time, the carving and so I'm trying to do that. And ultimately, hopefully, I'm hoping, I guess I'm saying this for the first time, I'm probably hoping to write a book of some kind. And so that's probably the next step.
One with pictures or just words?
No, it'll just be, well, the book with pictures is probably coming out this summer. So I worked on a graphic novel with my brother and an artist. It's a series, but we're putting out the first volume this summer. Kind of dealing with these questions of, it's about Saint Christopher, the dog-faced saint that has a dog head. So it really is about the problem of the exception and the problem of residue, the problem of hybridity, and how this can fit in a bigger pattern. But the book that I want to write would basically be kind of taking the ideas in my videos and synthesizing them into something which is cohesive, and so that's probably the next thing I need to do, because at some point, I don't know about you, but at some point I'm feeling like these YouTube things are going to run out. Like this YouTube world is going to, it's already kind of pressing in terms of control, in terms of the whole social media problem of people getting censored and banned and stuff. So it seems like it's going to get worse. That's one. And then also, I don't want to end up just kind of running around in circles at some point. And so hopefully it can move towards something else.
Yeah. To end it in a way. Yeah, that's kind of the final purpose of the Evergreen documentary. Once I'm done with it, I'm done with it. Once I've given it its due, then it no longer rules my life. In a way, and it doesn't anymore. But like that.
What about you? What are you? Because I've seen you with is it James Lindsay? I guess I've been seeing him a lot on your channel. Like, what are your next? Yeah, what's your arc?
Yeah. Well, I decided to start to publish my literary writing on Substack, and we'll see how long that lasts. But I'm doing my last novel first, and then just continuing to put them out. So that takes a lot of concentration, and it's actually a gift because I'm out. It's forced me to take Twitter less seriously. Well, let me put it this way. I use Twitter a lot to connect with people for the interview portion of my content, which is, I think the interviews are very sustainable because they can go wherever and they're not me just recycling my own self. I guess I'm recycling my curiosity, but by the basic fact of it being curiosity, it's always kind of leading me in different directions and stuff like that. But, and then I also use Twitter to glean a story of the day kind of content where I ingest a story of a day, and putting that creative energy from being a critic back into being a creator has really like forced me to look at Twitter as just this absolute cesspool of selfish behavior. and even people who are acting bad, you can't even call them out because now that's part of the game. They act like a complete jerk, and then people call them out on that, and then they say, see, this is why you guys are a bunch of jerks, or this is a bunch of white supremacists oppressing me, or, look at all these male chauvinists oppressing me. Like, no, you just said something stupid. So there's no solution there. There's just constant chaos. And so it's forced me to recognize that there's nothing really creative going on there except a witticism every now and then, and to really kind of focus on like the big demon in my life, which is like this huge, tremendous ambition that I fed and fed and fed for years. And now once I finish it, then I can put that to rest. And I'm no longer that boy struggling under this big weight of ambition that started my arc in the first place back in the mid 90s. So that is kind of, I guess it's a kind of a negative portrayal of a creative endeavor, but that's kind of what I'm engaging in.
Well, I'm happy to see that I know that you've been working on your own poems and your own novels for a while. So yeah, I'm happy to see that there's a way to kind of put that out there.
Yeah, I think eventually they get into good stuff. It's just, I shouldn't talk about it yet. I should just let it be. And when it's done, it's done. But eventually we get to the mythological and trying to recode that map, or starting to play around with the assembly language of our dreams, like really getting down there. And that's kind of what I wanted to have you on to talk about, but we didn't get there today, but we can't get there today. But I struggle under this idea of a template that's not tyrannical, and I search for the new, and I have a sense that if I brought that to you, you'd kind of say, well, you're doomed. You can never escape. The pattern is going to swallow you back up. There's never anything new. There's only, I guess, like, yeah.
Well, it's not as simple as you would think. And so let's take the Bible, for example. And so you could imagine that the stories in Scripture all culminate into Christ. And so that's kind of my contention. And so Christ then also distributes himself into a kind of indefinite mirroring reality. So it's not like there's just one story. And people who just tell one story, let's say, like you said, like the hero myth that has been kind of boiled down to its essentials, they just end up telling really crappy stories. They're not good, and so it also means that they haven't, people who are kind of retelling these boring hero myth stories have not completely imbibed the pattern, and also its myriads of possibilities as it plays itself out. And so, let's say, like a simple example would be, let's say, the crossing of the waters, right? That's a simple pattern that you see in every culture and of all time. But there are different versions of that where things don't happen in the same manner. And so let's say the way that Israel crossed the waters to leave Egypt, right, is not the same way that Jonah crossed the waters to get to Nineveh. That's completely different. And it plays out completely different. The similar elements are in the story, but the whole emphasis and everything about it is so completely different that to most people, they won't even be able to see that it's the same story. And that's fine. That's totally fine. So I would say that the idea is not to get too worried about, it doesn't end up playing out as this tyrannical pattern, because it reflects itself in the particulars that it kind of embodies itself in.
I think it goes back to that idea of worship. Like there's this space that reflects something greater. It's just something, but there's this little space inside of that story, inside of that drawing, inside of that person that reflects up, that is, if you polish it right, that it links up into something greater. And
yeah. Oh, that's a good way to see it. Definitely.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. That's in the recording now. I guess people know where to find you. I'll put links to your wonderful body of work in the description.
Yeah, and good luck with the publishing of your material. Looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
It's fun. One sentence at a time. I love sentences, but I hate paragraphs, and pages are just my worst nightmare. But if I just concentrate on the sentence, I'm okay.
You're an aphoristic person. We all know that. Yeah, that's where you definitely shine.
That's where my seminality is best concentrated. We're going to end the recording now. Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.